This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. In the middle of the night, I stumbled upon an anonymous post. What is it like to have a deaf girlfriend? The most liked comment was from my husband. Take off her hearing aids during intimacy and call out your ex's name. Below, there were countless 660 SAXS. Someone asked, aren't you afraid your girlfriend will find out? He replied, now she's my wife. She's deaf, so she can't divorce me. The confident tone attracted more ridicule. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the familiar avatar. The moment the image enlarged, I collapsed onto the sofa. It felt like my blood had turned to ice. It was Tony. That little cat avatar was something I had captured 2 years ago, in the neighborhood. I had never posted it online, only sent it to him. Later, he changed all his platform avatars to this cat image. There was no mistake. I shakily opened his profile. The latest update was a blurry photo of holding hands. The post date was 5 years ago, on the day Tony and I got married. I clutched my phone, struggling to breathe. A pair of hands suddenly wrapped around my waist. A faint wooden scent mixed with the smell of alcohol invaded my nose. Wife? He bent down to meet my gaze, his finger brushing my cheek. Have you been crying? It's my fault for making you wait so long. Then he pulled out a necklace from somewhere and put it around my neck. It was the one I had admired while shopping. It was very expensive, and I couldn't bring myself to buy it, but Tony remembered. I had to admit, he really knew how to handle a woman's feelings. For every major and minor holiday, Tony would give me gifts, big or small. It wasn't about the value but the thought he put into it. Looking back, I was foolish to think he changed only for me. He must have honed his skills on his ex. I naively thought he was changing for me. Coming back to reality, Tony was at the dining table cutting steak. The dishes had long gone cold. Tony has a stomach condition and never eats cold food. When the cook didn't keep the food warm, Tony didn't touch it and fired her the next day. I instinctively wanted to stop him but ended up holding back. The sound of running water was loud in the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts tangled. Suddenly, Tony's phone on the bedside rang. It was an unknown number. I remembered Secretary Wang had mentioned T Corporation was bidding for an important project recently. Fearing I might miss something crucial, I picked up the phone. As soon as I answered, a woman's voice came through. Yuan, I'm back. Can we meet? I know you married a deaf person, but she really looks like me. Are you willing to abandon me for that deaf person? My heart tightened, and I instinctively hung up the call. It was her. Tony's first love, Serena. The first time I heard that name was when Tony and I first became official. He took me to meet his friends, and someone in the crowd joked that I looked like Serena. Everyone laughed, not making sense to me. After the party, I asked Tony who Serena was. The air in the car felt still for a moment. He rolled down the window, lit a cigarette, and said casually, an ex-girlfriend. I didn't ask more, but that night, he was in a bad mood, driving fast and running 2 red lights before being stopped by traffic police. Later, when my computer broke, I used Tony's computer for work, and accidentally opened a folder named Love. It contained records of his time with Serena. There were audio files of her singing love songs, vlogs of their dates, and every place they visited was documented. A very beautiful girl, the kind that a guy would fall for, the pure and innocent moonlight. The filming angles were all from his perspective, and it was hard to imagine Tony patiently editing these videos frame by frame. In the videos, he looked like a lovesick teenager, blushing even at hand-holding. Yet, in front of me, he always seemed so composed. He was always busy, and during the few dates we had, he was distracted. I wanted to take pictures to record our time, but he called me childish. When there were many people around, he would suddenly take off my hearing aids, watch my panicked expression, and smirk as he made me beg him. After watching the videos, I realized his friends were right. I did look a bit like Serena. I suddenly remembered when he proposed 3 years ago. Everyone around was teasing. Because my hearing wasn't good, my eyes were particularly sensitive. My intuition told me he was searching for someone else through me. At that time, I deceived myself into thinking it was just an illusion. Looking back, maybe it was true. Wife, who were you on the phone with? Tony came out of the shower and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. His warm breath spread over my collarbone. I suddenly came to my senses and shook my head. Tony had been drinking and didn't notice anything unusual. I've been too busy with work lately, no time to spend with you. If you're bored, I can have Alice go shopping with you. I stiffly shook my head. No need. Alice is Tony's sister. She doesn't like me and always pretends to be close to me in front of Tony. Once he's gone, Alice turns to mock me, saying I'm not good enough for her brother. I haven't told Tony, fearing it would put him in an awkward position. Without warning, my hearing aids were ripped off. Tony pushed me onto the bed and turned off the lights in one smooth motion. I closed my eyes, trying to suppress the urge to resist. For the last time. If it's really like that comment says, then I'll divorce him. The shadows of the trees outside swayed, making time feel unusually long. The rustling of the leaves in the wind and my labored breathing were crystal clear. He didn't know I was wearing invisible hearing aids. Last week, the doctor conducted new tests and evaluations. The audiologist provided me with a pair of ultra-mini hearing aids, placed deep in my ear canal, looking just like normal ears. I had planned to wait for Tony to come back and tell him, but now it was no longer necessary. Time ticked by. Just when I was about to collapse from exhaustion, I heard Tony call out a name, clearly reaching my ears. Serena. The cicadas outside suddenly fell silent. I closed my eyes and silently put an end to this marriage. That night, I couldn't sleep well. In a half-dream, I found myself back in my school days. Tony was a year ahead of me, but, for some reason, he repeated a year and ended up in our class. At that time, small cliques were popular in class. I was quiet and didn't fit in. And because of my grades, I was seated next to Tony, becoming the target of the class's exclusion. Tony was different from me, even if his personality wasn't the best. His good looks and family background made him popular wherever he went. I thought this kind of alienation was innate. One morning during self-study, a boy in the front row suddenly took my hearing aids and held them up, shouting to the whole class. I couldn't hear, only seeing them all laughing with their mouths open. The hearing aids were expensive, and I was anxious they might break. I cried, but the more anxious I got, the less I could speak. Tony, who had been woken by the commotion, kicked over the boy's chair and said, "Shut up, damn it." The whole class went silent instantly. He was a head taller than the boy, and with a slight reach, he helped me retrieve my hearing aids. After school, as I was about to leave with my backpack, he grabbed the strap of my bag. "Mushroom head, I helped you and you didn't even say thank you?" I didn't understand what Tony meant. His family was wealthy, lacking nothing. Even the principal had to show him respect. I bowed to him, and he smiled in confusion. After that day, Tony seemed to have changed. He started to take classes seriously. Although he would have topped the class even without paying attention, he helped me with homework as the Chinese class representative. No one dared to not submit their work. I was weak in certain subjects, and he actively helped me with math problems. At the age of first love, it would be a lie to say I wasn't moved. Thus, Tony and I got together. The girls in class who disliked me became even bolder in bullying me. He stood in front of me, and no one dared to target me anymore. Later, I learned that he repeated the year to defy his family because his parents disagreed with his relationship with Serena. He helped me because I looked a bit like Serena. I was truly deluded. How could I have thought he liked me? The next day, Tony was still asleep from drinking. I signed the divorce agreement and placed it on the bedside, then took out my backpack to pack my things. There wasn't much to take. Most of the things in the house were bought by Tony. I packed a few sets of clothes I often wore into my bag, leaving the house as empty-handed as when I first moved in. The only consolation was that I had saved some money from work, enough to get by before finding a new job. The agent wasn't able to find a place quickly, so I stayed at a hotel for the night. After taking a shower, I pulled out my old portfolio and edited several resumes to send out. I got married early, right after graduation. Now, looking at my friends' social media posts, my former classmates either have stable jobs, passed public service exams, or succeeded in their startups. Many are happily married with children, while I seem to be the only one who has achieved nothing. I vaguely remember after college graduation, I had found a good job that didn't require clocking in and out. My hearing issues made working from home perfect for me. During that time, Tony chose to start his own business to defy his family. Without the support of his family, he had to do everything himself, frequently going on business trips. Once, after returning from a business trip, I was deeply engrossed in finishing an illustration. He jokingly said I was too busy and wanted me to take care of his daily needs. On a whim, I handed in my resignation after finishing my project and became a full-time housewife. Initially, I would still occasionally take on small illustration projects to keep my skills sharp, but eventually, I completely neglected them. Tony worked hard, especially during the company's startup phase. Due to the lack of time to eat properly, he developed a stomach condition, and I felt guilty for a long time. I woke up early every day to make stomach-friendly dishes following videos. I packed his breakfast for him to eat on the go and lunch in a bento box to deliver to him, spending the entire day revolving around him with no life of my own. Looking back, it was foolish to be not only a substitute but also a free caretaker. Fortunately, I stopped in time. It's still not too late. When I woke up, Tony had sent me many messages. Where did you go? What's with the divorce agreement on the table? Be good and don't make a fuss. I'm going on a business trip for a week now. If you have any emotions, wait until I come back to discuss them. I didn't beat around the bush. I pulled out the post I had saved last night, took a screenshot, and highlighted his comment, then sent it to him. This is your account, right? There was silence on the other end for a while. Wife, that's not me. I found it amusing that he still wouldn't admit it at this point. I'm deaf, but I'm not stupid. What are the odds of such a coincidence, having a deaf girlfriend replying to a post like this? With an avatar, that was a photo I sent him, and the homepage showing a hand-holding photo with his ex. With matching people and timeline? You know whether you did it or not. Let's get a divorce. I didn't want to hear his excuses and directly blocked him on WeChat. Tony wasn't the type to swallow his pride and coax someone. Whenever there were conflicts, regardless of who was right or wrong, I would always take the initiative to apologize. He seemed convinced that I couldn't leave him, so he was always unafraid. Because of my lack of affection and physical issues, I had invested all my love in Tony. But people can get tired too. I followed him for so many years, and he only had eyes for his first love. I used to naively believe I could change him, but in the end, I was the only one touched. In the afternoon, I went to an interview at our corporation. The HR was very satisfied with my portfolio and offered a salary higher than I expected, telling me I could start work the next day. But before I could be happy for 3 seconds, I saw Tony around the corner of the hallway. He was with a tall woman. I immediately recognized her as Serena. Her long curly hair had a touch of mature charm, just as beautiful as in the videos. They were talking, and then Serena hugged Tony, resting her head on his chest and sobbing softly. Tony's body was stiff, his long lashes lowered, hiding the emotions in his eyes, allowing her to hold him. After a long time, he returned the hug, and they looked like a couple reuniting after a long separation. My heart ached, and I had to take several deep breaths to steady myself. So this was his so-called business trip. Eventually, reason won over emotion. I took out my phone, recorded the scene, and sent it to my lawyer. I didn't expect to encounter Serena so quickly. She was the new head of the design department and my supervisor. She greeted me warmly. "Haley, I've heard a lot about you." I nodded, pursed my lips, and organized my files to leave, but she blocked my way by leaning against the door. "Please move. I have work to do." "Is that how you speak to your superior?" Serena unexpectedly leaned close to my ear and sneered. "You really are deaf, huh?" I took a step back. "It's none of your business." "How is it not my business?" Her disdainful gaze lingered on my face. "You do look a bit like me. No wonder Yuan married you." I clenched my fists and raised an eyebrow at her. "Miss Serena, if you like being the mistress, then go ahead." Her perfect expression cracked slightly. "Who are you calling a mistress?" I shrugged. "Whoever fits the role is." With that, I pushed past her and left the meeting room. But after that, work that wasn't in my scope suddenly increased. Colleagues privately asked me, "Do you have a grudge with Supervisor Serena? This is clearly a matter for the marketing department, so why is it assigned to you?" It was evident that Serena was deliberately making things difficult for me. Since I was still on probation and needed the salary, I couldn't confront her directly. With an increased workload and disordered schedule, I even had to have an appendectomy at the hospital. Lying in the hospital bed, I came across a WeChat message from Serena. Her latest post was a blurry photo of holding hands. The caption read, "After all the twists and turns, it's still you." It was identical to the picture Tony posted 7 years ago. Who she intended to show was obvious. After blocking Tony, he did not contact me again. He probably, as usual, thought I was just making a fuss and would eventually come back to apologize. He kept delaying signing the divorce agreement, so I instructed my lawyer to file for divorce in court. That evening, I received a call from Tony. "Haley, what's all this fuss about?" His voice finally had some inflection. I remained expressionless. "I'm not making a fuss. I said I want a divorce." He seemed to be suppressing his anger. "You're getting a divorce over such a trivial matter? When did you become so unreasonable?" I interrupted. "Unreasonable? I clearly heard you calling Serena's name that night." He instinctively blurted out, "How could you hear that?" I found it a bit amusing. That night, I actually wanted to tell you that the doctor said I could wear invisible hearing aids now and be like a normal person, but it's not necessary to mention it anymore. He urgently tried to explain. "Wife, let me explain. It was just a slip of the tongue." I coldly responded, "What about you hugging her at our company?" He hesitated. "Wife, it's not what you think." "I can't explain." "There's nothing to explain." I lowered my gaze. "Where are you? I want to clear things up with you in person." "No need. Since you're dragging your feet on signing, we'll see each other in court." I hung up the phone, trying to suppress my chaotic emotions and forcing myself to focus on my drawings. At the end of the workday, Serena stopped me. Haley, come with me. I frowned. Supervisor Serena, do you need something from me? It's for a social event. My assistant is unwell today, so you'll come with me. She crossed her arms and leaned on the desk, eyeing me with a slight smile. You don't think money is easy to earn, do you? I took a deep breath. With only half a month left in my probation period, I had no choice but to go. Over time, the whole department noticed that the new head, Serena, had a grudge against me. Even though she had an assistant, she deliberately asked me to take meeting minutes. When I was extremely busy, she asked me to buy coffee from a place far away, not from the cafe downstairs. My colleagues in the same team sympathized with me, but as employees, they couldn't afford to argue with a superior and risk their jobs. The social event was at a hotel in the city center. As soon as we entered the private room, a portly middle-aged man approached. "Oh, designer Serena is here." Serena greeted him warmly. "Mr. Peter, you're too kind." Mr. Peter turned to me, and who might this be? "This is my assistant, Haley." Serena smiled and pushed me forward. I stiffly said, "Hello, Mr. Peter." On the way here, I had already learned that Mr. Peter was the main client for the day. If he signed the contract, the factory's production funds would be secured. Excellent, excellent. Please, both of you, have a seat. Mr. Peter eagerly pulled me to sit beside him. "Waiter, bring the drinks." While the waiter served the dishes, I took out my design draft. "Mr. Peter, here is our final design draft for your review." Peter pretended to look it over, nodding frequently. "Miss Haley, not only are you beautiful, but your work is also outstanding." I'm not good at socializing and could only manage an awkward smile. Just as I was about to explain the design concept, Peter tossed the draft aside. A glass was shoved into my hand. "Forget the contract for now. Miss Haley, let's have a drink together." I don't drink alcohol and was about to refuse when Serena urged. "It's rare for everyone to gather like this. Assistant Haley, just have a drink with Peter. Don't ruin the mood." Everyone at the table was cheering, so I had no choice but to take a sip. The strong liquor spread from my tongue to my throat, and as it went down, it felt like a fire was burning inside. The glass was quickly refilled. "Miss Haley, you have a good tolerance for alcohol." Another glass? I couldn't refuse, and by the end, I lost track of how many glasses I had drunk. My head was spinning, and I could no longer hear clearly. A pair of hands found their way to my shoulders at some point. Realizing it too late, I pushed him away and made an excuse to head to the restroom. Peter, with his beer belly, followed me, placing his hand on my shoulder and pulling me into the hallway. "Where are you running off to? Stick with me, and there's plenty of wealth and glory. Socializing and drawing are so dull. Let me show you something more interesting." A pair of hands found their way to my shoulders at some point. Realizing it too late, I pushed him away and made an excuse to head to the restroom. Peter, with his beer belly, followed me, placing his hand on my shoulder and pulling me into the hallway. "Where are you running off to? Stick with me, and there's plenty of wealth and glory. Socializing and drawing are so dull. Let me show you something more interesting." He smiled lewdly, his chubby hands roaming over my body. "As long as you give in to me, signing any contract is no problem." I couldn't curse him anymore, using all my strength to bite his hand. The man let out a pained gasp, furious, and kicked me. "You filthy bitch. It's your luck that I'm interested in you. Don't be ungrateful." A sharp pain shot through my lower abdomen. I slumped against the wall, gasping for breath, like a fish dying of thirst. Before losing consciousness, I heard the sounds of a struggle nearby. When I woke up, my nostrils were filled with the smell of disinfectant. A boy in a black sweatshirt was sitting beside me. "You're awake. Is there anywhere you feel uncomfortable?" As I was about to sit up, he reached out and pushed me back down. "Don't move. You just had surgery. The doctor said you need to lie down and rest." A dull pain started to register in my abdomen. I raised my head despite the pain and asked, "Who are you? What surgery?" The nurse came in just then to check on me. "You had a miscarriage. How careless of you to drink while pregnant," she grumbled as she changed my foredrip. The baby had a high chance of being unhealthy. Luckily, it was only a couple of months along. "You need to be more careful in the future." Miscarriage? I blankly touched my abdomen and realized that I hadn't had my period for the past 2 months. I'd been busy with work and appeals, and since I had a history of menstrual irregularities, I hadn't thought much of it, so there was a little life inside me. In just 2 months, the baby hadn't even fully formed before turning into a pool of blood. I felt a heavy sadness in my chest that I couldn't quite describe. By the time I realized it, tears were already falling down my face. The boy beside me fumbled to hand me a tissue. "We couldn't contact your family. This gentleman brought you to the hospital." The nurse turned to look at him. The boy, being pointed out, awkwardly scratched his head. I swallowed my bitterness and thanked him. "Thank you for bringing me to the hospital." He hesitated. "Senior, I'm Rocky. Don't you remember me?" "Senior?" I stared blankly for a few seconds, with tears still in my eyes. He looked embarrassed as he rubbed his head. "I put a love letter in your drawer when I was in my first year of high school." "A love letter?" I was confused. Back in high school, I was a transparent presence in the class. How could someone have written me a love letter? On Children's Day, when the seniors went to the lecture hall, I took the chance to sneak it in. It was a pink heart-shaped envelope. The more he spoke, the redder his face became. Finally, he nervously watched for my reaction. With his description, I vaguely remembered. During the busy high school days, there were few idle activities. That day, our teacher had organized a lecture in the auditorium. Tony went to play basketball, and when I came back, I saw him holding a heart-shaped envelope. When he looked at me, there was a fleeting moment of panic in his eyes. Then, in front of me, he crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it into the trash can. Many girls liked him in school, and he received countless love letters, so it was rare to see him display such an expression. At that time, we had already unofficially become a couple, and I trusted him, so I never questioned anything. I thought he was afraid I'd be angry if I saw the letter, so that was what happened. I didn't care about the love letter itself. I just disliked being deceived by him. I was so honest with him, yet Tony didn't trust me. The atmosphere grew tense. I felt awkward and didn't know what to say. Rocky pulled out a card from his pocket. It was my desk nameplate. "Senior, do you work at our company?" I couldn't figure out his peculiar thought process, but I nodded. His expression relaxed. "So you're a new employee. No wonder I haven't seen you before." I was puzzled. Was he also an our company employee? I didn't think I had ever seen him at the company. But he didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. The next moment, Rocky pulled out a thermos from somewhere and opened it. A rich aroma immediately filled the hospital room. I didn't even figure out where he got the chicken soup from before I had a bucket in my hands. Under his sincere gaze, I couldn't refuse, so I had to drink a few sips from the bucket. The warm chicken soup made my stomach feel cozy. After the miscarriage, I needed to rest, so I took a week of sick leave from work. In the following days, Rocky came every day to bring me nutritious meals. I told him the hospital had food, but he wouldn't listen. "Senior, I'm the one who brought you to the hospital. Besides, you're a patient with no one to look after you. How can that be?" I couldn't argue with him and had to let him be, planning to treat him to a meal after I was discharged. Watching Rocky bustling around in the hospital room, I felt a mix of sadness and absurdity. How ironic. On the day I was admitted, Tony didn't answer the hospital's calls. And since I was hospitalized, he hadn't called me once. I remembered when Tony had appendicitis right after college graduation. To take care of him, I juggled classes and assignments during the day and stayed up all night looking after him, waking up every 2 hours to prepare nutritious meals. I was so naive and foolish back then, believing that sincerity would be reciprocated. After all these years with him, I now didn't even know what I liked about him. I lay in the hospital for 7 days, then, ignoring the doctor's advice, I rushed back to work. My savings were running low, and Rocky had paid for my hospitalization. I needed money badly. However, my desk was empty, and my colleagues hesitantly told me that everything had been thrown into the cleaning room and that I had been fired. I confronted Serena. She looked at me with disdain. "You're just an intern and took an unrestrained half-month leave. If you had been confirmed, it would have been even worse. If I kept you, everyone else would follow suit." "What about the work?" I sneered. "Don't you know why I was hospitalized? Aren't you afraid I'll tell everyone about your actions? Do you think anyone would believe an intern like you?" Serena laughed, calmly sipping her coffee. "Do you have any evidence?" I clenched my fists. She was a manager with powerful backing, and I had nothing. Just then, a familiar male voice came from behind. "Who says there's no evidence?" Rocky walked in. His gaze swept coldly over Serena before settling on me. Though he was dressed casually like yesterday, his aura was more imposing. "Who are you?" Serena reacted first. "Do you believe I'll call security to throw you out?" Rocky subdued his aura, sat me down on the sofa, and smiled at Serena. "Don't know who I am? Do you know Sam? He's my father. Sam is the chairman of the company. Sam's Club is a century-old enterprise involved in various industries. Its scale so vast it would take days to describe. Rocky is the boss's son?" I widened my eyes, struggling to process this information. Serena couldn't fire me. Not only that, but she was also suspended and investigated for favoritism and corruption. Peter also ended up in jail for sexual harassment. I knew this was Rocky's doing. No one else had the authority to do this. He had helped me so much, and I didn't know how to repay him. Rocky didn't seem to care. I'm just using my dad's name. I didn't like being in debt. Reluctantly, I spent half a month's salary to treat him to a big meal as thanks. But when it came time to pay, the waiter told me it had already been settled. I looked at Rocky. He spoke sincerely. "Senior, you removed a malicious employee for my dad. I should be the one treating you." I pursed my lips, but we agreed I would treat you. He looked surprised, his delicate brows furrowing. "How about this? Next time, I promise it won't happen again." Unable to argue, I agreed to treat him next time. After the department meeting, I ran into Serena. The secretary was moving her belongings out of the department head's office. Following an investigation by the HR department, Serena was found to have overstepped her bounds by privately negotiating with employees and clients, violating company policies. Moreover, she had initially secured her position at Sam's Club through nepotism, thanks to her uncle being a senior executive. Back then, no one had discovered her connections or dared to challenge her. Now that her misconduct had been exposed, her position as department head was no longer tenable. I pretended not to see and was about to walk past her, but Serena stepped forward and blocked my way. "Feeling smug, are we? I never would have guessed a deaf person like you could hook up with Sam's son." She scrutinized me and sneered. "But do you think Sam's family would let a divorced woman like you in?" I met her gaze with a blank expression. "You should think carefully before you speak. Spreading rumors has legal consequences. Besides, Tony and I are still legally married. What right do you have to comment on me here? Even if you were his first love, if he could cheat once after marriage, he could do it again. Can you guarantee he doesn't have other attachments? Let's assume I'm divorced. But you, on the other hand, are known for your scandalous behavior. Who do you think is more likely to be scorned by the public?" Serena's smile froze. I didn't wait for her response and walked past her. After Serena left, I successfully became a full-time employee. The client accepted my design, and the contract was signed for production investment. My boss promoted me to the department head position. The first thing I did with my salary was to treat Rocky to a meal. There are many excellent designers, and my proposal wasn't exceptional to the point of being irreplaceable. The client's choice was partly due to Rocky's influence. He had helped me so many times. Apart from doing my job well, I could only do my best to return the favor. I researched extensively online and chose an expensive French restaurant. I had heard from the secretary that Rocky studied in France, so he might enjoy the cuisine. However, when we arrived at the restaurant, Rocky took me to a modest Chinese restaurant around the corner. He sat down casually and grinned. "I'm not used to French food. During my study abroad, my classmates and I ate at Chinese restaurants every day. Chinese food is just better." He shared many amusing stories from his study abroad experience, and I couldn't help but laugh at his jokes. We ordered a table full of dishes, and by the end of the meal, I found tears inexplicably streaming down my face. Rocky, looking anxious, handed me a tissue. "What's wrong? Is it too spicy?" I shook my head. Probably to accommodate my taste, Rocky had ordered mild dishes. "It's nothing. Maybe something got in my eye. I'll go to the restroom." Standing in front of the sink, I looked at my reflection in the mirror, letting memories flood back. The taste of the food reminded me of my university days. Tony and I attended the same university. Because the cafeteria food was terrible, everyone almost always went to small eateries outside the campus. After Tony had a falling out with his family, his bank cards were all frozen and he had to earn his own tuition. He wasn't used to outside food, so we rented a small apartment together, bought groceries after class, and cooked our meals. Though the apartment was small and the food simple, those were the happiest times for us. Later, Tony became successful in his career. I made dinner every day and waited for him to come home, but he rarely ate with me. He would come home drunk every time. At night, we would lie in the same bed, back to back, like the closest of strangers. Sometimes I would get angry, but he would sweet-talk me and I would soften. Looking back now, our relationship had already soured then. Or perhaps, he had never loved me. I was just his substitute for his ideal love. Pleased when he was happy, discarded when he wasn't. Many days passed, and the lawyer couldn't reach Tony. I didn't want to make the divorce a public spectacle, but since Tony was delaying signing the papers, I had to ask the lawyer to formally file a petition with the court and include video evidence as supporting material. Meanwhile, the last project in the design department concluded perfectly. Rocky treated the entire department to a meal. However, halfway through the gathering, he took me to a conference hall. An enormous electronic screen displayed the bidding for a Southern City expansion project. I was confused. What are we doing here? Rocky winked at me. You're about to see a great show. The host on stage was enthusiastic. Next, let's welcome Tony, the president of the T Corporation. I looked up and saw Tony, dressed in a suit, walking to the center of the stage. The spotlight shone on him, and he radiated an air of assured success. I laughed self-deprecatingly. No wonder he hadn't been in touch these days. His career was booming. He was indeed a busy person, not even having time to sign the divorce agreement. After the presentation, Tony's confidence was well placed. Among so many competitors, his proposal was indeed outstanding. Just as the decision was about to be finalized, Rocky suddenly stood up and went on stage. He hadn't even changed out of his suit from earlier and hadn't brought the proposal document. He spoke into the microphone while the PPT behind him changed to simulate scenarios. I was shocked and puzzled. Though Rocky was the chairman's son, he showed no airs and got along well with everyone after joining the company. During a recent project, our team had worked around the clock, and Rocky, to allow me more rest, had stayed at the company himself. Where did he find time to prepare a bidding proposal? Having paid attention while helping Tony with documents, I had some understanding of business knowledge. Even I, an outsider, could tell that Rocky's proposal was more feasible and cost-effective than Tony's. In business, maximizing profit with minimal investment is key. The situation turned swiftly. The investors, fearing a missed opportunity, signed the contract with Rocky right on the spot. An unexpected twist caused Tony's plan to fall through. His expression turned icy. Having been with him for so many years, I knew he was on the brink of rage. It was natural to be unhappy after losing a crucial project. So this was the great show Rocky mentioned. In the past, I would have felt sympathy and comforted him. Now, seeing his frustration, I felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. When we returned to the party hall, most people had already left. Rocky and I took a few inebriated colleagues home. He nervously glanced at me from the driver's seat. "Senior, you're not upset with me, are you?" I smiled. "Of course not. I'm actually quite pleased. Do you still like him?" "Not at all. I was blind before," I answered firmly, then realized I was catching a glimpse of Rocky's sparkling black eyes in the rearview mirror. Suddenly, Serena's words came to mind. Coupled with Rocky's recent unusual behavior and the love letter from high school, I felt unsettled. Although I didn't know why he wrote me a love letter back in high school, it was all in the past. Tony used to swear undying love to me. People change, and Rocky is so exceptional. So, I casually asked, "How did you decide to participate in the bidding?" Rocky paused for a moment, then turned to smile at me. 2 months ago, I heard my dad mention this project, so I volunteered to sign up. He said if I succeeded, he'd grant me one condition. I breathed a sigh of relief. So that was it. Rocky dropped me off downstairs and left. When I reached the door, Tony suddenly appeared from behind. He smiled coldly, with a tone of disdain. "No wonder you wanted a divorce. You've climbed up the social ladder." I frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about?" He smirked at me. "Haley, I never realized you were so capable, managing to team up with Rocky's family against me." I had no idea about any issues between him and Rocky's family, and found it baffling. Not wanting to argue with him, I hurried to unlock the door. Tony stepped forward and blocked the door. "What are you so nervous about? What's the matter? Did you sleep with him?" I suppressed my anger and smiled up at him. "No, but I'll give it a try once the divorce is finalized." "So when will you sign the divorce papers?" Tony's face darkened to the extreme. It was rare for him to be at a loss. Previously, I always catered to him and never spoke against him. Now, I would not give in. Tony took a deep breath and grabbed my shoulders. "Haley, what exactly do you want?" "I did date Serena, but that's all in the past. You don't need to keep holding on to it, do you? Even if we're divorced, do you think Rocky's family would accept a divorced woman like you? You're just after his money, aren't you?" I laughed coldly, almost applauding. Indeed, a pair of adulterers, their rhetoric was identical. After all these years of marriage, he saw me as someone so vain. "Fine, I'll make it clear." I looked at him sarcastically. "So what if I'm interested in his money? Are you richer than him? Without the Tony family, you seem pretty unsuccessful." My words hit him hard. Tony's grip on my shoulders tightened. I cried out in pain, and before Tony could release me, Rocky rushed over and punched him. The two began to fight, creating a chaotic scene. I tried to separate them, but was pushed and accidentally aggravated an injury on my abdomen. Blood smeared onto my white shirt. Tony looked over distractedly, and in that moment, a punch landed on his face. Tony was at a disadvantage, pinned and beaten. Rocky, not yet satisfied, even kicked him a few times while taking me to the hospital. The wound was half torn. The attending doctor, an elderly man with white hair, frowned and said, "You young people, can you take better care of yourselves? Appendicitis isn't a major illness, but you still need to rest." Tony frowned. "When did you have the surgery?" I turned my head away and ignored him. How dare he ask? While I was hospitalized for surgery, he and Serena were probably all lovey-dovey. Now he remembers me. What a show. The old doctor put on his reading glasses and reviewed my medical record, muttering, "Young lady, you need to take care of yourself after a miscarriage. You should be careful. If you don't, it might cause health issues later." I nodded, intending to leave. Tony grabbed my arm, looking incredulous. "Miscarriage? How could you have a miscarriage? Were you pregnant with our child?" Before I could answer, my eyes welled up. After the miscarriage, I often had nightmares. The cries of a baby echoed loudly in my dreams, then gradually faded, no matter how hard I searched. I worked desperately to numb myself, pretending to be strong, but in the midnight hours, I would touch my empty abdomen, feeling as if a part of my heart had been hollowed out. I had once wanted a child with Tony so badly, and so did Tony. When we first got our marriage certificate, we were indeed affectionate. He even picked out names for the child, looking forward to the arrival more than I did. Yet the baby left silently, and even his father never knew of its existence. I pulled my arm away from his grasp and slapped him, holding back tears as I scolded him. "Yes, I was pregnant. Serena killed my child. Why don't you go and settle the score with her? Because you don't have the guts." Tony, with my slap, was left stunned and motionless. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Tony seemed to be in a daze, lost in his own world. Every day, he waited for me downstairs at the company, sending me texts and calling. He carried my favorite snacks from before. He acted as if nothing had happened. If it weren't for my clear memories of what had happened, it would almost seem like we were back in the passionate days of university, with him waiting for me outside the classroom. The company colleagues knew about our situation. Even when security was called to drive him away, he wouldn't leave. Since he wasn't making any extreme moves, the police said it wasn't their concern. Worried he might snap, Rocky suggested escorting me to and from work every day. I refused firmly. He insisted, claiming it was his duty to protect a valuable company asset. The product I designed last time sold very well, and the client recommended us for a larger project, which is still in its early stages. I had no choice but to comply. So, I didn't see Tony for a whole month. On the last day of October, the court enforced the divorce procedures, and Tony was still struggling. "Haley, after 5 years of marriage, is it really going to end like this? I'm no longer involved with Serena. Why can't you trust me? I know you're upset about the loss of the child. We're still young, and we can have another." I looked at him impassively, his current self being far removed from the white-clad youth of my memories. "You're right, I will have children, but not with you. It's fair and reasonable for me to ask for a divorce since you cheated. You can be with whoever you like." I interrupted him directly, unwilling to waste more words. He was left speechless, staring at me silently. Disgusted, I turned and walked away. After receiving the divorce certificate, Serena came to Sam's Club once. I was away on a business trip in another city and missed her. Colleagues said she wasn't doing well. She had been blacklisted in the industry, and no company dared to hire her. Tony wasn't faring any better. His career had plummeted. He had hoped to inherit the family fortune, but found Tony's father had brought back several illegitimate children, leading to chaos over the inheritance. On Christmas Day, it snowed heavily in Beijing. Rocky expressed his feelings for me. I listened seriously, thanked him for his help, and clearly stated that I wasn't considering such matters at the moment. Rocky was younger than me, and everything about him, from his background to his appearance, made countless girls like him. He shouldn't hang on to a withered tree like me. I used the divorce settlement and bonus to buy a small house. After everything I'd been through, I just wanted to live well, and I had come to terms with everything else. Rocky seemed to anticipate my response. He looked me in the eye seriously. "Haley, remember the condition my dad promised me? I know what you're worried about. I've already taken care of everything, so you don't need to be concerned. You can rely on me or choose to kick me out at any time. I liked you since high school, and that affection has continued to this day. I know what I'm doing. After that day, he continued to wait for me downstairs every day. Knowing I liked sweets, he bought a variety from a city, changing them daily. Since my hearing wasn't good, he would deliberately bend down when speaking to me. Colleagues teased me about my upcoming second spring. The young man waving to me from afar was always enthusiastic and sincere. I knew those silent, tearful nights would eventually pass. Tomorrow would always be filled with brilliant light. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.